On this episode of AV Week, we talk about the rise of AV over IP products. Registration is open for Integrated Systems Europe, and AVI SPL picks up Sharps in Canada, what that means for globalization. All that and more next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 320, recorded Friday, October 13th, 2017. Horses for courses.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Extron Electronics and by Middle Atlantic, what great systems are built on.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio, visual, news, and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to talk about the news and information that we have gathered this week, my buddy and pal from north of the Canadian border. His name is Brock McGinnis. He's from Westbury National, and his butt is tired this week. How are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. We had our annual customer event this week called Imagine on Wednesday. A lot of people through the door, a lot of excitement. Great time to be in the audiovisual business.
Yeah.
But you are correct. I have a tired butt, and my feet are even tireder.
Well, I will say this. I was not at the event, but just from the pictures from both exhibitors and your team, it looked like a really, really cool event. So
very successful again, for which we are grateful and feeling fortunate.
Also with us, his name is Chris Janes. He works for a company called Immersive. How are you, sir?
Good, Tim. Doing great. A little bit tired as well. I got back off a plane last night at about midnight. I was in the Bay Area meeting with customers, but it's always worth it. So, yeah, it's good.
All right, so let's kick this off here. I actually had several friends and colleagues in the industry send me this article about 10 minutes after I picked it up myself. So it was a nice little hive mentality from our friends over at Commercial Integrator, quote unquote, AV over IP products. Market sales will go up 130%, according to Future Source. What they're talking about and is the transferring, the transmitting of audio and video, and actually control as well over the network, right? Those products, the rise in them are going to go up 130%. My 2 cents is this is a no-brainer that makes sense to me, right? I don't know if the percentage is right, which is why you guys are here. You're smarter than me on this, but that makes sense. Brock, is this as simple or is a no kidding moment as I think it is, or am I missing something?
No, it's simple, and I don't think that any of us in the industry needed a survey company or data company to tell us that AV over IP is the way that things are happening more and more today, and the way that things will continue to happen more and more in future.
Chris, when you guys live on the network, right? Not for nothing.
Yeah.
Immersive is in this. You guys live on the network. Are you finding this and you're running into this more and more?
Yeah, absolutely. I know, in a sense, you could view us as sort of the poster child for that evolution. I mean, we're an AV box, but we're really inside that box pure software that lives over TCP/IP. So, it's funny. I've mentioned I was just talking to customers, and I was in the Bay Area talking to Stanford University, and they're rolling us out in a bunch of rooms. And one of the faculty there said, why don't we use the video switchers? They had a classroom that had a video switch, and we got into an analogy discussion about telegraph. If you look at telephony and its evolution, there was point-to-point dedicated cables as well, right? That was the telegraph. I know where this office is connected to, and I can click, and send a message. And then we went through circuit switching, which is telephony in the early 70s. And then to packet switching. So it's not surprising to me at all. And I think everybody understands it now that we're moving through that same evolution in AV, and that you'll have packetized control, packetized video, everything on a routable network. Now, will that always be TCP/IP? I don't know for sure, but for now, it definitely is.
All right, Mr. McInnes, Chris brings up a good point. We don't, why don't we use switchers anymore? And is there a path here where the folks that we see at the various trade shows every year, where we're looking at 64 by 64 and 128 by 128 switches, hardware switches, big boxes, right? That have 128 inputs and 128 outputs. That 5-6 years ago, this was the norm. Is that going away?
No.
Okay.
So there will always be horses for courses, and I don't think that AV over IP necessarily means AV over the network.
Explain
I think I think that the folks who run data at a university or a large corporation, they're running data, they're running voice, and I'm not entirely sure they want the kind of information that we're generating and transmitting sitting on the same piece of copper or glass that and going through the same IP switch that their data is. We're a very different kind of an animal. I'm certainly not an IT expert, but I do understand there needs to be priority for video. And all of those little packets need to arrive at approximately the same time, so that, like we're doing right now, I can see you and Chris as whole beings rather than not. That doesn't always fit with the way that a client wants their network to operate, or is comfortable from a security perspective, or a QoS or a priority perspective. So I think we're talking about Internet Protocol and TCP/IP. I think we're talking about a common standard, which is awesome. These folks at the SDVOE, I believe it's called, are attempting to create a standard, as we now have with HD-base-T, which we used to call video over Cat5, or what was that? What was the generic that we used for that kind of? Which, of course, what Crestron's digital media is, and all Extron's Crosspoint stuff, and the other switcher manufacturers. I think we're just refining the manner in which we're transmitting and distributing audiovisual. We're putting it in a format that IT professionals are going to be able to understand better. It will become standardized, or more standardized, amongst manufacturers, and therefore, in theory at least, make it easier for everybody to work with everybody else's products and stuff. Chris, does that make sense? Because you are very much more an IT professional than I am.
Yeah, Brock, I like that comment that it's TCP/IP, but it might not be on the network. And I think you mean the existing network infrastructure at like a large enterprise. Yeah, totally agree. And in fact, you'll see often that people will build a separate VLAN, obviously the AV VLAN that's running on their network. Where the rubber meets the road, though, is these IT guys want to, at least I've started to see a trend where these guys start wanting it to run on their network in a consistent way with other data traffic, because they want to monitor it and pull analytics. They want to be able to manage it. They want to ensure that it has QoS headers so that it passes through the switches in the right way and things. So I'm seeing a mix of both. Once in a while, we'll be even deployed on an isolated network. But by and large, if AV components can be deployed in a way that they communicate with the other devices, other IoT things hanging on the network, other applications running on the network, then it sort of becomes, it becomes more valuable, because now you have users that are streaming data. Yeah, and it's a big challenge, Brock, because you're right. If you don't want to walk into a large enterprise and say, guess what? We're going to put 10 megabits a second times however many rooms you have on your network starting tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. But they definitely will say, well, let's stand up a VLAN and see how it looks, and maybe punch some holes from that VLAN into our data, like our data lake, so that we can pull that data out and maybe do analytics on it and things, which you just couldn't do in the old point-to-point days, for sure.
No, and so, Tim, I think all that's really changing is the nature of the switch. There are still going to be, I'm not sure that an SVSI box will ever communicate with a Just Add Power box or a Crestron box, even though they all say that they're AV over IP. That may never happen, because the secret sauce is what their advantage is in the sales process of their product over somebody else's. But they're all going to use a Cisco switch, or or one of the other brands of switches. And I think part of the proliferation that is occurring now is that we have switches. We have switches that are capable of dealing with the kind of data and rates and that AV over IP is producing. Not all networks are at that point yet where they can
Right.
have the level of sophistication of managed switches, but the switches are the switches are readily available and inexpensive. We've been using AV over IP in asymmetrical situations. It's not 64 by 64, it's 64 by 4 or 4 by 64, where that makes perfect sense. We've primarily been using them in situations where there are fixed inputs. If you think about, for example, a sports bar that has 16 cable TV receivers, those receivers are fixed. They're the only sources that are ever going to be distributed to the 150 TVs in any given environment. We've been dramatically unsuccessful with the first couple of generations of AV over IP product in scenarios where a user is bringing their own device and physically plugging it in. And so I'm not sure if it's because products like SVSI and Just Add Power and some of the other early entrants in the market were designed for the residential world, where you have typically pretty fixed input-output scenarios. But we had real trouble with laptops connecting and handshaking with those generation, and so that's been a challenge for us in the corporate world.
Interesting, and that still is a problem. It's not, that hasn't gotten better as the years.
Well, I can't say that it's a problem, because what happens when an engineer encounters a product or a topology that fails?
He stops using.
They don't really use that much anymore.
Okay. All right. Well, if your engineers have time, let me know.
Right.
All right.
But otherwise, it's brilliant, Tim.
All right. Moving on here. Our friends over at ISE, Integrated Systems Europe, have announced that their registration is open for next year. If you are so inclined or in the European market, they're going to be at the RAI in Amsterdam, February 6th through the 9th. This will be our fourth year covering this. And I remember distinctly 3 years ago, actually picking Mr. McGinnis's brain about whether or not to go. And I think that for us, at least, it makes a whole lot of sense. You know, it's a show that has gotten more and more new product releases. In talking with Mr. Blackman, Mike Blackman, the guy who runs ISE, I think last year he said they had over 200 brand new product announcements. Chris, from your guys' standpoint, Mersiv is showing again this year. What does this show mean to you guys for as far as the North American market and also the global market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, where we started going, I think 2 years ago. I've always gone to the show and walked the floor. We've been there with partners, but 2 years ago we stood up a booth and really were there as a company, as a manufacturer, and it was a huge hit for us. And I think probably the two things I took away: one, it's a better pacing for me and the team to interact with our own customers. Now that's a very manufacturer-specific view, because our whole roadmap really obviously depends on those dialogues and what's happening with the end users and what do they really want, what are our integrators seeing and things. When I get 2 bites of the apple, go to ISE at the beginning of the year, that kind of helps drive some of the roadmap decisions we're making later in that year. I think probably the more important thing, though, is that we actually launch, last year we launched multi-room at ISE, and we chose that explicitly because we wanted to set the tone for the year. And there's a clock and a cycle, right? So if I do that at ISE, it starts to create the groundswell. It creates a lot of interest in our larger North American market to come in and say, hey, let's do a webinar. Let's learn about what it means now to, not just collaborate in one room, but treat all your displays like a collaboration network or whatever it is. That actually worked really well for us. So I think you'll see us start that now, where we'll set the tone for the year at ISE. We'll double down on that tone at InfoComm. We'll probably, obviously InfoComm for us is closer to home, so we can bring more people and set up training sessions and things. But The other thing I think that's really interesting is if you think about it from the integrator perspective, and if you look at the pacing of this market, I think it would be hard to argue that things aren't changing faster every year. So if you believe that this market is more driven by software and more IT than it has been in the past, it's always a good thing to have more touch points with the manufacturers if you're an integrator, I think, because we're changing the product based on user market feedback constantly. So if you want to have, if you want to come in and see, hey, what are these manufacturers doing in ISE, and then also do the same at Infocom, you're going to probably see changes in 6 months. I mean, in 6 months, we launched the Exchange integration, for example, right? So that's a big thing that happens fairly quickly. That doesn't mean your whole team has to go over, obviously, but if you send folks over, you get a better pacing, I think, more touch points throughout the year.
Brock, from the North American integrator standpoint, more and more folks like us, media partners, more and more U.S.-based manufacturers are going. People like Chris, our buddies over at Utiligy, they have their first stand there this year at ISE. Why should North American integrators pay attention to this show, specifically this show, as it's the start of the year?
So Chris has picked up on it. There is a cycle. Products are now introduced at ISE. The tone is being set for the year, to use Chris's words. Tone's being set for the year in Amsterdam. Those products are announced at ISE. They are physically available to see, touch, experience at Infocom, and they're deliverable at the beginning of what is nominally the business year in North America, which starts on Labor Day. Is that about it, Chris? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
And
yeah,
so
we kind of, to be fair, we stumbled back into that process, but when we did the multi-room launch, that felt exactly like we had picked up on a clock cycle that makes sense to our end users even. So we'll
absolutely, yeah, absolutely, it makes sense from a planning perspective. And so if you want to be in touch, it doesn't mean that you have to be there. The media coverage now, Tim, is fantastic. And you will remember 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago now, what an advocate I was for AVNation and your team to go for the first time.
Yes, sir.
And that I stuck my fingers into the crowdfunding pool to ensure that you got there, because I believe so strongly in us having that information. And it was, I think that was a big launch for AVNation. Rave also does an excellent job. I see that some of the commercial media outlets are now starting to pay much more attention to the European market than they have in the past. There is, I think there's a new AV Technology magazine that has just launched in Europe. It's a big deal. I personally have not been to ISE. This is on my bucket list, and it's been less about getting to Amsterdam, where I've been numerous times, than getting to Amsterdam that week in February, which has traditionally been a vacation week for my family. And if I have to choose between, let's say a beach in Barbados and a cold, dreary Northern European in February, sometimes or at least far, I've been a little selfish, but and I will get there at some point. I love European shows. They have I think, a better approach to doing trade shows perhaps than some two over here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. And I would actually agree with the beach in Barbados as well. All right. Wrapping up here, folks, from AV Network. Last week was an interesting couple of days for mergers and acquisitions. And the one we're going to talk about here, and the reason actually is because we have Brock on, is AVI SPL picked up Sharps AV, and Sharps AV is out of Calgary, Alberta. Chris, you obviously sell to both of them. When groups like this come together, what does this say about globalization, and both in the North American market, but also worldwide?
Yeah, I think obviously it's become a global market. Our product has to be in 16 languages, and we sell all over the world. And our customer support has to be able to manage it, inbound from any region in the world. In the Sharps and AVI SPL story, that's an interesting one. I think a lot of that had to do with opportunistically, it had to do with the oil and gas downturn. I think so that those guys probably ended up seeing a lot less activity than they'd want in regions like Alberta. We didn't have a lot of direct interaction with them. And from a manufacturer's point of view, when something like that happens, so now these guys are part of AVI SPL as the larger network, the reality is, and I have a different, maybe selfish perspective, but the reality is I still have to engage with all the regional offices anyway. Yeah. You have to still do your homework, right? So even if AVI SPL is a globally, I can't just call up 5 people at AVI SPL and explain why what we do is important and how they can benefit from, bringing it to their customers. I have to be in those regions anyway. I have to be there doing lunch and learns with their teams. We have to be just as engaged. So in a way, it's just a new name tag for us on that side. But you're right, it's a harbinger for a larger globalization thing that's happening in general. To talk about which region did that PO come in from, or is that project being deployed in, that doesn't happen here. That doesn't matter to us. When we sell to P&G or we sell to Nestle or we sell to GE, it doesn't matter if it's in Cincinnati or if it's in Switzerland. It's still an important customer, and we support them exactly the same, in fact. So
yeah. Mr. McGinnis, you have a unique perspective in the fact that Westbury is in Canada. Not being silly here, Canada is a large country, and it's not exactly like you guys are next door neighbors. But this is another step in globalization, especially for AVI SPL, right? This is a company that has offices not just in the U.S., obviously now in Canada, but also they've expanded overseas. Talk for a second, if you would, about that very thing, about the expanding, globalization of companies like this. You've got Avixa. I almost said Infocom, Avixa, expanding out and offering really trying to get the CTS out there beyond the U.S. and beyond North America. You have companies like HB Communications and others reaching out beyond their borders. And AVI SPL, I say, from a number standpoint, is obviously the biggest of these players. But globalization in the world of AV.
So I don't actually think this is a globalization story.
Okay.
I think that this is more about a company like AVI SPL wanting to grow internationally so that they can service their customers internationally. It is the Nestles and the P&Gs and the companies that Chris was mentioning that a large AV enterprise service provider wants to be able to take care of, to have a footprint everywhere, and that's great. I think that's us as an industry growing up, Tim. Okay. It's Siemens takes care of customers everywhere. Johnson & Johnson takes care of Johnson Controls rather takes care of customers everywhere. Why shouldn't AVI SPL and some of the smaller players in the industry, like Whitlock has created a global presence alliance so that their customers can have a consistent look, feel, and interface everywhere they are, which is great. The interesting thing for us, of course, is that we are in the Canadian market, and I got a number of calls that day asking for a reaction. How do we feel? AVI SPL. Well, AVI SPL has been in Canada for quite some time now, and we compete with them. Sharps has been here for longer than I've been at Westbury, and I've been here almost 20 years, and we compete with them every day. They have offices everywhere we work, and we work everywhere they have offices, and I'm the luckiest guy in the world because last week I had 2 competitors, and now I've only got 1. Right? But realistically, I had 2 competitors, and now that I've only got 1. So your perception of this, the globalization and being that kind of bad golden arches, this pervasive U.S. hegemony, culture taking culture everywhere. That's not it at all. You know what my concern about this is, Tim? My concern is an old story called MCSI. This is about. I work in the AV industry. I love the AV industry. The folks that work for those companies no longer work for AV companies. They work for bankers.
Yeah.
And bankers need returns. And they need returns not 5 years from now or 3 years from now. They need returns today, or at the end of this week or the end of this quarter. And this is frightening. And so they're going to deal with their customers and their employers and the marketplace, their vendors. And I'm sure you've already had some of this, Chris. They're going to deal with things very, very differently than we in the friendly little AV industry have always done things. And I know all my competitors. We do stuff socially together. We're the same people. We just happen to wear different badges on our shirts from time to time. Our vendors are our partners. They're not enemies. They're not people that we go out of our way to squeeze and screw and try and take some specific advantage of. I worry that the AV industry is going to be overcome with these Walmart kind of attitudes towards vendors, and a Goldman Sachs kind of attitude towards the customer, who is somebody to be harvested from. Not Goldman Sachs specifically, but that kind of Wall Street caricature. And I don't know, Chris, does this concern you?
Yeah, it does actually. That's a really interesting perspective, Brock. I like it. And I probably haven't articulated it, but it's been a thought in my head for quite a while that, we're software guys that ended up in the AV industry. So it's quite a different perspective. But one of the things I've loved is the engagement level I get from my channel partners, from my integrators and resellers. It's unbelievable. I can fly to a very sort of hot under the collar customer in the financial industry. The resellers there, they haven't thrown us under the bus. We work together. The customer's part of that. They all know each other. You're right. It's almost like a small family approach to problem solving. We're bringing high science into that culture, and it's really kind of cool. And I think it's probably why we've been successful, because we sold directly through the AV channel. A lot of people looked at us early on and said, wait a minute, Chris, where's your computer science background? You throwing that away? You got to go sell through the IT guys. Or why don't you just go direct? Customers love this stuff. No way. That would have been a disaster. It's been unbelievable selling through the channel. You're right. It's funny, though, you mentioned MCSI. They funded research of mine at the university back during their heyday. Yeah, believe it or not.
And did your paycheck stop?
They absolutely did. They stopped the funding of the grant, Now, that's not the reason I left the university. I left the university to start Mersive, of course. But, yeah, funny, huh? So when those big behemoths get going, they start spinning off cash to weird projects, and one of them will happen to be in my lab. You're right.
That's
hopefully we don't lose that culture. I don't know how you hold on to it as things get that scaled, but if it's about scale to serve the customer in the region, rather than doing a regional, a different integrator in each region, that's awesome. Hopefully that scales well and everybody holds on to the culture we have, because I've loved it. It's been an awesome ride, and hopefully we continue it. So,
and that is exactly the tone that I expect from a company like Mersive. You are part of us. We all eat, breathe, sleep, equipping, enabling our customers to do whatever it is they do better than they do it now. Once everybody's living on a whole bunch of borrowed money, and it doesn't matter if it's borrowed or quote unquote invested, that's still a borrowing that is expecting a specific rate of return, is just how different does it come? And I look at an AVI SPL and this kind of race to $1 billion, and nobody cares if they get to $1 billion other than the stock market, which is, I'm sure, what these PE guys want to do with it. I mean, we never care about top line. You probably don't care about top line unless you're looking to sell. You care about what's left over at the end of the week. And so, it's been a bit challenging to compete with at times. And
Yeah, Brock, and I think I have a theory here that the reason that the AV industry behaves the way it does in this good way is that it's the technology that is directly impacting the user.
Right.
It's your ears, it's your eyes, and
Right.
if you're a sales force, that's great, but you're not necessarily directly impacting the aesthetics of what I see throughout the day or what I hear throughout my workspace or whatever. It's really because we build technology that interfaces users' senses with their technology landscape. And I think that's why we care so much about the end user. And then that creates all the other good things you mentioned, I think. So
Yeah.
it's a thing I've been carrying around. I thought I've been carrying around a while. And I almost feel bad because I think AV, there's a whole industry of computer scientists out there that talk about human-computer interaction and all this stuff. All that stuff is happening already in AV, and they don't know about it. I mean, it's these two communities that live side by side. So.
Yeah, and so Tim, it's not the globalization is not a horrible thing. If Xerox or Canon or Ricoh or these people have to have either a technical store or an agent in every town and city in the world in order to service their copiers or their phones or the other business products that from a previous generation, why shouldn't an AVI SPL or a Diversified or Whitlock/GPA have someone in every town that has that logo on it and has that badge? That is not, I don't mind competing against that. I don't mind differentiating myself against that. I think that's kind of positive and will be a natural outgrowth of AV entering the mainstream IT business machines, business services and products space. My concern is only about, oh my gosh, somebody has to pay for this.
Yeah. All right. That will actually be the last word we have on this whole show.
That's good.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Mr. Chris Janes from Immersive, thank you, sir.
Yep. Yeah, it was great. Thanks a lot, Tim.
How do people get a hold of you if they want?
Check out our website, immersive.com. I'm on Twitter under the Visualist, and I've got a blog under the Visualist as well. You can find that on our website.
No, absolutely. All right, Mr. McGinnis, thank you, sir, as always.
I don't have any cool title like the Visualists. I don't have a cape. I don't have a cape. I don't have a mask, but they can find me at Brock McGinnis on Twitter. Of course, we're here at Westbury National in downtown Toronto.
All right, very good. My name is Tim Albright. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it is TD Tim David Albright. But for more importantly, you can find us at AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv, you'll find this program and a host of others. By the time you're listening to this, I will be fully ensconced at the HD-based T World Congress. We'll be writing
Barcelona?
In Barcelona.
You're going to Barcelona?
In about 24 hours, I'll be on a plane to Barcelona. Yes, sir.
Oh, one of my favorite cities in the entire world.
And the fact that you have that as a favorite city does not shock me in any way, shape, or form.
I love
Barcelona. Never been. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to hanging out with some great folks.
Please come home.
I intend to. I mean, I have a wife and kids, so, it would be a bad thing. So, I'd at least get a nasty letter, But we'll do that. We're actually have a couple more things we're hitting. We're hitting New York with New York Digital Signage Week, and we're wrapping up the year with at AVEC actually with Mr. McGinnis. We'll get to see him in live and in person. So all that and more at avnation.tv. While you're there, check out our underwriter section. These are the folks who help us and support us and help us continue to bring you things like this show and going to HD-based T and other stuff and ISE. So avnation.tv, avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. This has been AV Week.